These are the new DJI goggles Integra, and these are the DJI goggles 2. Both of these support O3, have OLED displays, and are a premium FPV goggle for the latest digital FPV systems. However, these goggles are $150 cheaper than these. Today, I'm going to walk you through what the differences are between the new Integra goggles and the original goggles 2, share with you my thoughts, and then at the end, hopefully, you will have an idea of which goggles are best for you. Now, just to be clear, I was not sent these goggles for free. I have bought these with my own money, and that would not have been possible without the support of the Patreons on my channel. And I just want to say a massive thank you from me to all of my Patreons. I would not be able to keep doing this without your support. Okay, so let's talk about the main differences between these two sets of goggles first of all. So, the big difference everyone will notice is this, the battery on the headband. Now, we'll talk about this a bit more in a minute when we go to the overhead, but basically what you have here is a built-in 2,450 milliamp hour lithium-ion battery. The idea of this is rather than have this external battery pack, which I've got here, or this one here that we had from DJI, which used this cable and had it swinging down around your arms and everything, they've now decided to build the battery into this headband piece at the back. This is very similar to what we'd seen from DJI in the past. They actually did this with the goggles RE and the goggles White Edition for their consumer drones, and actually, having spent a little bit of time with it, I quite like it. It also has an adjustment mechanism on the back here for adjusting the strap, and what you'll find is the cable actually runs through the strap on this side, down and into the side of the goggles to provide it power. Now, externally, they are very, very similar, but there are some little differences you will spot the more you look at them. For instance, whilst that external housing is the same, there is now a top head strap option, which you can plug in between the back battery and the goggles themselves. The antennas on the goggles Integra are not removable compared to the antennas on the Goggle 2, and also the antennas are a little bit longer as well. Now, you also have a number of other little differences too, which I talked about in my other video. For instance, there is no longer a touchpad. We now have a joystick on the top. The LED pad is gone from the side, and they've removed the focus adjustments from the bottom. You now simply have the IPD adjustment underneath, and instead you now have fixed focus lenses, and DJI include this little box with them that has all the different lens options that you can use with these goggles. Now, overall, the main headline specs between these two goggles are the same in the sense of both goggles support the O3 system. Both goggles have 1080p OLED displays. They both work with the O3 ear unit, the Avata, and the original ear units when using it with that new firmware. The real big differences are, though, what I've said already, as well as a couple of other internal tweaks. For instance, there is no Wi-Fi in the goggles Integra. There is no speakers because it doesn't have the Wi-Fi functionality. And there's also obviously no longer that LED pad on the side or that touchpad. Obviously, as a result of this rework, they have left some space, and they have filled that space inside with a GPS module. Now, that really isn't used in the UK or Europe, but it does allow people in America who are using the Avata, for instance, with remote ID, to be able to use the goggles Integra without having to plug in their smartphone. Now, just going in closer, just to show you around those differences, as we've already mentioned. So externally, the plastics are very similar. We've got the antennas, as I've said. They are non-removable. No matter how much I try to tug on these, they won't come off. And as I've said, what is quite interesting is they are longer. So for instance, if I pop the antenna off my goggles 2 and place it next to the antenna on the Integras, you can see that it is a little bit longer overall. Not sure what that's about, but it does hint that something else has changed. As I also mentioned, you've got this buckle at the top here for a top head strap, which goes to the battery piece at the back, but you've still got all of the vents and everything around the front, just like we had before. Now, obviously, there was a touchpad here, and that is now gone, and they've replaced that with some LEDs, which is our power indicator, and there's now a power button underneath here. So if I press that, it flashes, and it's exactly the same as it was on all of other DJI products. For instance, to turn the goggles on, it's a double press, and then next to that, we've got our USB-C port. Obviously, that SD card slot, as I mentioned, has now vanished from over this side here, and we don't have that LED pad here either. And then we have the SD card now in the center there. Not really sure about that personally. However, it really isn't a deal breaker for me. On the bottom, obviously, there are the changes as well with regards to that focus adjustment being removed, and we've now just got simple IPD sliders. Nice and flush with the bottom of the goggles. Not completely flush, you can feel them, but they're certainly not sticking out like the knobs did on the goggles too. Now, there are also lots of other little differences you'll see. So, for instance, there's no longer the sensor in here that turns the displays off when you lift the goggles off your eyes or your head. And there's no longer a bind button here as well. You now do the binding via the power button that they've added on the bottom. You can also here now see the differences between the lenses on these two sets. Whereas here we've got that adjustable focus. We've now got a fixed lens on this. And as I said already, DJI include this little box with the lenses in, which go from -8 all the way up to +2. And then what you do is fit them into the goggles. You simply pop the lens off, place the lens you want in there, and then simply place that on, and then you're ready to go. Something else that's changed between these two goggles as well is the face mask. Now, this is going to be quite hard to show you here. However, I can say that the face mask on the Integra has been improved. It is slightly a different shape, especially around the nose area. The nose area on the original goggles too came quite high out. That doesn't happen on the Integras, and it is much flatter. And I can also confirm that the faceplate is swappable between these as well, so you can put the Integra faceplate on the original ones. If we flip them over to the back, you'll also notice a couple of other changes. They still have all the little spikes that stick out to fit, but they are shorter on these goggles. And now there's these little grooves in the top of the plastic here, which is at the top of the goggle, that hopefully will help with airflow and maybe improve the anti-fogging performance. It's also worth noting that the plastic piece is different as well. Whereas the plastic piece on the original goggles too didn't go all the way around, and the bit around the nose was just foam, this is now solid plastic all the way around with this foam stuck to it. So there are some changes. They're not dramatic. In my initial tests, they are definitely a little bit more comfortable, but it's not night and day. The overall fit and feel, though, of the goggles is very similar. The biggest real change on the goggles externally is the built-in head strap battery. Now, this is quite a large unit and it does add a bit of weight, but I didn't feel that weight when the goggles were on my head. It does have this adjustment knob on the back, and the way it works is it actually drags in the strap from this right-hand side, and you can see that go in. And this is the side with the built-in cable that powers the goggles. You can actually feel it in there, so if you feel the strap, you can feel the wires running through here into the goggle on that side there. And then on this side, we simply have the strap coming out, and there is actually a quick-release buckle here that allows you to disconnect it if you want to. Now, as I've mentioned, the built-in battery on this is 2,450 milliamp hour. However, I wanted to pop the cover on it just to show you what the situation is and discuss what the modification options could be on this as well, because whilst this is a convenience upgrade, it isn't going to suit everyone. So I've removed the 4 screws and gently popped the lid off, and then if we lift this up, that then reveals the inside of the battery area. Now, if I look in here, what we have is what appears to be 2 18650 cells. We've got that ratchet mechanism in the middle there. I can just see the cable from the strap going down into the middle, and there does appear to be a small PCB down here on the top of the batteries. I can't tell at this moment if the PCB actually has any circuitry on. I suspect this is actually a dumb module that is providing the power to the goggles. And looking at it, I don't see any reason why you wouldn't be able to do some modification here, add an external power connection or anything else. But let's just get in a bit closer and have a look at that PCB. Okay, now we do have this board and it does have a little bit of circuitry on it. However, it doesn't look to be BMS or battery battery management. In my opinion, it's probably some basic battery safety. What you've got is the cells either side. Now, these do look like they are permanently fixed in the sense of the tabs are soldered to the cells. Then that goes into the main PCB, and then we have our cable coming off here, heading off into the head strap. Overall, I don't think it would be very difficult at all to do a modification on this. Certainly add a connector, there's plenty of space here, and allow you to add an external input if you wanted to, whether that be a 3.5mm DC jack or anything else. I think there's definitely scope here for modification if you did want to go with an external battery option. Just before I put this bit back together, I just wanted to mention something that I spotted. The way the ratchet mechanism works is you've got one on this side that moves that way and one on this side that moves that way. There's these long plastic pieces, and I do just wonder how strong these are going to be over time. The strap comes in and goes around it there and back out, and whilst I like the design, I would have much rather these were made out of metal and not plastic. I could be overthinking things here, but I do wonder if this is going to be a failure point over time. Obviously, only time will tell, we'll have to see, but it is just something I spotted as I was doing the disassembly. Now, obviously, that built-in battery is going to need to be charged. Just testing it on the USB-C port, you can see it draws 1.75 amps roughly at 8.72 volts. Now, you can also power these goggles from USB when they're on and charge the battery at the same time. If I just turn that on to demonstrate that, you will see that the current draw will increase. It'll just reset and come back on, and it draws at this point about 2.2 amps. Now, what I can't tell you at this moment in time is if you can run these goggles indefinitely whilst charging, or does it still draw some power from the built-in battery and slowly go down? This is something I will test on longer usage. However, here and now, what I can say is it charges at about 1.75 amp and it draws 2.2 amp when on, so you're gonna easily be able to do some maintenance whilst in use this way anyway. And if you are worried about that built-in battery's longevity with regards to flight time, you can charge it between use as well. Now, the controls on the DJI goggles Integra is a bit of a mix between what we've seen on the V2s and the original Goggle 2. As I've said, the touchpad is gone and we now have that 5-way joystick just like on the V2s, and then behind that there is a back button. It's worth mentioning though that there is no external dedicated record button on these goggles. The only other control is the power button that is located underneath down here next to the USB-C port. This is exactly the same kind of power button as you find on all of the DJI products. So for instance, we've got the battery LED on the side, so if I press that, you'll see the LEDs will start to flash, and to turn the goggles on, you would simply press and release, press and hold, and the product would power up. Now, as a result of the tweaks they've made to the optics and having fixed focus lenses, DJI have also changed the field of view. The original Goggles 2 had a 51-degree field of view, and the Integra goggles have a 44-degree field of view. Now, having spent a little bit of time looking at this, it is clear that the field of view is smaller. However, I will say that I think the optics are actually much better on these goggles, and whilst the image you're seeing is smaller, I am now able to get that image full size on the screen, fully in focus without any problems at all. There is no overlap of the lenses, there is no blurring. It is a much clearer experience for me personally on the Goggles Integra than it is on the Goggles 2. However, it is a smaller experience, but I actually think that's okay because you're not able to get that full immersive field of view on these anyway, simply because of the lenses. It is quite different to what you would experience on the V2 or V1 goggles, because on those I was able to fully utilize that large field of view, where I've never been able to do that on the Goggles 2, and having that reduced really doesn't cause me personally any problems. I haven't flown them extensively, but what I can say is, looking through the lenses, it certainly isn't dramatic like I'd seen on other goggles such as the Orcas. Now, just to try and demonstrate to you the differences in field of view, I've recorded both sets of screens with my DJI Action 2 camera set to exactly the same settings. Nothing has been zoomed, nothing has changed. Here you can see the view of the Integra goggles with a test image, and then I will move over to the view on the Goggles 2, and this here shows you the difference between the two that I'm seeing on the camera. But when you're looking at it through the lenses, it is much less of a difference than you would expect. There has been comments online saying if you set your Goggles 2 to about 80% 80%. That'll give you an idea of what it looks like. But in my tests, that actually isn't correct. If you set your goggles 2 to 90%, in my view, that is basically what you're seeing here. 80% is actually much smaller, and that 90% mark is what really does look the same on both units, and it is far less than I anticipated it is, and probably most people would be as well. And I actually think DJI have got it about perfect on these goggles, because whilst I am someone that likes a large field of view, that field of view was not usable on these goggles like it was on the V2s, for instance, as I said. And what they've done here is given you a field of view that does appear to be fully usable. It is much better, less optical issues, and overall I think it's going to give a better experience. Now, obviously, there's going to be a number of questions with regards to software as well as extra capabilities. What I can confirm is as follows. The software between these goggles is basically identical, and as a result of that, the behavior is as well. The ham file still works as it did before. All of the RF quirks, the behavior, everything is exactly the same. Nothing has changed between the Goggles 2 and the new Goggles Integra. So for those who do want the benefits that come with the ham file, as well as the other capabilities, that's all working fine. No need to worry at all. Next, I just want to touch a bit more on this subject with regards to this GPS module, because I'm seeing all sorts of nonsense and hearsay being posted online with regards to this. Now, the DJI Goggles Integra now have a built-in GPS module. They don't have RID, they don't transmit remote ID in themselves. They simply have a GPS module that sends that GPS data to the DJI Avata aircraft. That module is there to allow users to be able to use these goggles with the Avata in America, the remote ID now area, without the need to connect their smartphone. Just to explain this properly, a few months ago, DJI released new firmware for the Avata that made it compliant with the new remote ID guidelines. To use that on the DJI Goggles 2 or the V2 goggles, you had to connect your smartphone before you could take off. The reason for that was so it knew the pilot location. The difference between these new goggles and the original ones is DJI have now added that GPS module into the goggles, which means you no longer have to connect the smartphone. It is not that anything has specifically changed with remote ID. They have not added remote ID to O3. They have not done anything different other than adding the GPS module in the goggles, making it more convenient to fly than having your smartphone connected. Now, there are some interesting differences between the way it worked before and the way it does now. For instance, I believe on the RID firmware before, you had to connect your smartphone to take off, but you could disconnect it in flight. You're not now obviously going to be able to do that with these goggles because the GPS module is permanently connected. Now, I personally do not see anything wrong with what DJI have done here. Adding the GPS module into the goggles is a no-brainer. It makes the user experience better. Nothing has changed though with regards to remote ID on O3 or general FPV, and DJI adding in this remote ID option for this system doesn't mean it's going to be any more likely to come to the DIY system, the O3 system. That GPS module being in there doesn't make it any more likely DJI will turn on remote ID on O3, because if they were going to do it, they could do it anyway and make you connect your smartphone. This is all about making the user journey with the drones such as the Avata simpler and any future drones that these goggles may support. And it really doesn't warrant the amount of hearsay that I'm seeing around this. The facts are, yes, there's GPS. Yes, that's transmitted to the Avata for use in America with remote ID or any other country that requires remote ID, but it isn't some great conspiracy to force remote ID on general FPV users. If the law changed that DJI was required to make O3 use remote ID, they are obviously going to have to comply, but they would have to comply on these goggles. They would have to comply on the Goggles 2 as well. And about the only real difference I can see between these and the Goggles 2 is that you potentially have the option to disconnect your phone after takeoff, whereas you would not have the option to disable the GPS on this after takeoff. But DJI could change that anyway and force you to keep the phone connected, otherwise you would lose video. So there really is nothing here to worry about. These goggles are not spying on you. It is simply an additional feature that DJI have added to make people's life easier in countries that is required to comply with remote ID. Now, I'm just going to do a couple of flights with the Avata just to get a bit of a feel for how these goggles are in the real world. Now, you can see there, we've got the band on the back of the head. To be honest, it feels okay. I've got no concerns about that extra weight. It gives a nice bit of balance, as I've already said. So what we're going to do is fly the Avata and just see how they perform outside compared to in the studio, and just make sure there's nothing that I've particularly missed with regards to the performance and the fit and feel. Now, I have just done one quick flight with the Avata on the goggles, and this is my second one. I'm probably going to keep this in sport mode today because it is windy as bloody hell here, and I don't want to risk anything with this thing too much. As you can see, look, there's large pools of water around here today, so I certainly don't want to end up in one of them, although I do have the DJI Care on this thing. Really, we're here to discuss how the goggles look. Now, the first real thing is going to be the field of view. I'll be honest, I am more than happy with how the field of view is on these goggles. Yes, it's smaller, but in flight, I really don't find myself wanting more. Now, I am seeing a little bit of vignetting on the sides, a very, very small amount. To be honest, it's mostly on my left eye as well, not my right. Just cutting the edges of the display a tad. I have tried to adjust it out, but I can't quite do it. But the real big difference on the optics, and I'm just going to stop there a second, just adjust them a bit more, is that I can virtually see corner end to end. It's night and day better than the previous Goggle 2. It really, really is. Now, it is clear I'm not seeing as much overlap as I was seeing between the lenses on the Goggles 2 either, so I'm not seeing that sort of fuzziness where the lenses converge. And I think the optics on these goggles are just better. They really, really are. I'll stay over here a minute just because we've got some dog walkers that have come out now the sun's shining. Well, I use the word sun shining loosely here in Wales. Now, how they feel on the head, they feel fine. I can feel that weight on the back. I'm just going to move it a tad up the back of my head. I have felt it does want to slide down a little bit, although I didn't have it that tight. I've just adjusted it there now, so hopefully that will make it a little bit better. I'm going to turn myself off from the wind a bit. Hopefully that will keep the mic out of it too. But they're comfortable. Absolutely fine. No problems with that battery on the back of the head at all. Yeah, I think in many ways these are a better goggle. I'll be honest with you. And the cost saving is dramatic over the original goggles too. You know, you are seeing quite a big saving here. Let's go around there. What's also interesting is that I'm just going to stop. Can you see that highlighting of the low signal on the remote there in orange? Look at that. That's new in the new firmware as well. Not seen that before. It's been a while since I've flown the Avata in these modes. You forget how much you want to just go in among the bushes with this thing. It really does make flying in tight spaces quite easy. But yeah, overall, about the only thing I'll say on the displays is that I am seeing a small amount of glaring towards the bottom on the numbers and lettering. I'm just going to adjust the headband a minute just to see if I can make that any better. If I push them down a little bit, it is better. They're definitely better on the nose, but they're still not perfect. It's an improvement, is definitely what I would say over the original goggles. It's definitely an improvement. So what I think I'm going to do is just spend a bit more time flying, and then I'll share my thoughts a bit more when I get back to the studio. Okay, so after spending some time with them, I can share with you some thoughts on the fitment before I give you my final thoughts on the goggles themselves. Overall, I got no complaints at all. The lenses are definitely better now I've spent time with them in the field as well. As I've said in that little bit of a video, I'm still getting some mild vignetting, mostly on the left eye, and I can see a little bit of sort of glare on some of the menu items, but it's not on the main display itself, and it is dramatically better than it was on the goggles too. Overall, I think DJI have done a nice job here on taking what they did with the goggles too and improving some things. The face mask is definitely slightly different, but it is not perfect. It is still putting pressure on my nose, and whilst the fitment and the light leak side of it is fine, it is clear that the goggle design is what is causing some of the issues like we've seen on the goggles too, but I do think they are better. What is definitely better though is the optics. They are, for me personally, night and day better than I was getting on the goggles too. That reduction in field of view helps, but also I'm not getting that convergence on the lenses like I was on the goggles too, because I have to keep the lenses quite close. Otherwise, I could see them on the displays. I just don't get that on these goggles at all, and I think DJI have actually done a much better job here, and this is probably what the goggles 2 should have been like at release. Now, with regards to that battery on the headband, it obviously does add some weight. However, for me, it also adds balance as well. I really do not see it as a problem or a downside, especially when you consider the goggles 2 had a proprietary battery already. Yes, you're going to need to charge this whilst out in the field, but you can do that via USB, and you could run it on USB whilst using them at the same time. Obviously, I've not had enough flight time on them to be able to give you time of charge, the amount of flight time you'll be able to get when using it with a battery bank, but I really don't think it's going to be a massive problem, but obviously only time will tell on that one. There's also going to be a lot of options around mods on these two, and I do think there's scope for modifying that back panel, maybe putting an XT60 on there, and it's going to be interesting to see what the community do with that as time goes on. Okay, so to share with you my final thoughts on the DJI goggles Integra. Now, what I think DJI have done here is very, very clever. Whilst they don't have all the features and capabilities of the goggles 2, they have what is important. OLED displays, 1080p, full support for O3 on the Air unit, the Avata, and the old Air units with that new firmware. It has the DVR, and really what you're giving up here isn't massive, and even though there is a reduction in field of view, I think it actually makes them a better goggle as a result of it. In the end, what DJI have been able to do with the goggles Integra is take away some features most people don't use and reduce the price by $150, and I personally find it very hard to recommend anyone would buy the goggles 2 over these unless you specifically need the ability to either remove the antennas or have the focus control on board. In the end, I think these goggles are a better FPV goggle for most people, and whilst I know some folks will be put off by the built-in battery pack, I personally don't think it's a real bad thing. In the end, there is a big saving to be had here, and for what you're actually giving up, I think these are a no-brainer. Now, these goggles obviously raise the question of what's going to happen with the other two, for instance, the V2s and the goggles 2. I personally don't see DJI ending the goggles 2 anytime soon. However, I do think these are the nail in the coffin for the V2s, and if you're someone who really does want a set of goggles that has the widest possible compatibility, I would be looking to get them now, as I suspect these will be the replacement for them moving forward. Now, as always, I really am interested in your thoughts. If you've got any questions, please do put them in the comment section and I will try and answer them as soon as I possibly can as well. As I said at the start of the video, I was not sent these goggles, I actually bought them, and if you have found this video interesting and you'd like to support us to keep making content like this in the future, please do consider checking out the link to my Patreon. I am only able to keep making content like this on the channel through the support of my patrons. I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who has supported the channel so far, and if you think we've earned your support today, please do consider checking it out. There's also a link there to buy me a coffee as well if you'd like to support us that way too. So, that's it. $150 cheaper. I really don't see a reason not to get these over the others. That's it from me. Stay safe. I'll speak to you soon.